peace movements make me nothing but sick, because the people, although they are well motivated, doubtless, within these peace movements, are in fact being led around by the nose by KGB and the like of the well-financed foreign agents whose sole stake is to advance non-nuke and non-missile, something that I would have thought Canadians would be far wiser about than they appear to be.
In the Comox Valley of British Columbia's Vancouver Island, just a few miles from the town of Courtenay, lies the last remaining Canadian air defense base west of Quebec, Canadian Forces Base Comox. From this base, all unidentified or unauthorized aircraft approaching western or northwestern Canadian airspace are intercepted and identified. The squadron is 409, all-weather fighter squadron, Nighthawk squadron. The aircraft is the McDonnell F-101 Voodoo. Skilled pilots, deadly weapons, serious business. Born of the epic struggle for freedom of 1939-45, Nighthawk Squadron is symbolic of the tradition, honor, and spirit that was the RCAF. The spirit that was to lead Canadians to a new era of world-class technology, military power, and international influence. Despite the ebb and flow of political support for the Canadian Armed Forces, it is the spirit that lives on in the hearts of many Canadians.
We were following a tremendous tradition, a tradition that was set by that light blue uniform of ours, of which we were extraordinarily proud.
Well, that's the air base over there. I feel very close to the squadron. It's my old squadron. I feel very close to the base because it was my station at one time. And because I like it so much, I'll never leave here. I
look back on it as very happy days. And I'm talking not only wartime services, of course, I'm talking as well peacetime militia or auxiliary in the Air Force. I'm still involved in the militia, and I'm very pleased to be able to be.
I've served in the RCAF/Canadian Forces for the last 28.5 years. Always flown fighters as a backseat navigator. Thoroughly enjoyed it. The last 11 years, off and on, I've been flying the good old F-101 Voodoo here. It's a beautiful airplane. I expect to retire in the next 6 months, and the airplane will be also. But it's been a good life, and the only thing I would change is integration. Trying to stuff everyone into one green uniform was a retrogressive step as far as morale is concerned.
What a stupid mistake it was in the Canadian services, and we were RCAF. I speak very feelingly about it, to have changed to a single green uniform, which took away all that identity that was part of our pride, part of our tradition, part of the reason we were a very effective force.
In the Europe of 1939, after 10 years of dedicated preparation, the National Socialists of Germany stood ready for their long-awaited conquest of Europe. In London, the Baldwin, and later the Chamberlain governments, continued to lead a course of disarmament, believing that war could be avoided by negotiation. The smaller countries of Europe were to follow the lead of their English ally. It was to cost them their freedom. Poland was to be the testing ground for the new Nazi war machine. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war concept of advanced bombing and dive bomber ground support with high technology aircraft, was a strategy the Europeans were unprepared to counter. With the Polish army destroyed and the people defenseless, Warsaw was razed from the air. Air power had arrived and was to be the deciding factor for the remainder of the war. Within a few months, all of Europe was to fall, and for many Europeans, democratic freedom was never to return. Even the huge French army, the largest and most fortified of Europe, was routed due to lack of air defense. Isolated on their island, the English were next. The German Navy set course to cut off supply. The German air offensive was prepared. The fate of freedom was held by British air defense, the RAF. It was clear that the air battle would be decisive. Canadians were quick to respond. Against this dismal background, 409 Nighthawk Squadron was formed June 17, 1941. Equipped with the Defiant, and 2 months later, the more modern twin-engine Bullfighter with airborne radar. They were to be one of the first and most successful RCAF night fighter squadrons. The German bombers came, and for a time, English cities burned. Combined RAF and RCAF fighter command blunted the German air offensive. But the cost was high. In Canada, the war effort was in full swing. Fired by the urgency of war, the high-technology industry of modern aircraft production was quickly established in Canada. Hurricanes, Mosquitoes, and the largest aircraft ever built in Canada, the Lancaster bomber, were all built in quantity.
The Lancaster itself was a phenomenal, nothing short of a phenomenal aircraft, capable, as was proven, of carrying that Grand Slam bomb, which was the master of the sky in those days, which was a 22,000-pound bomb. Normally, we carried one 4,000-pounder, 12 500-pounders, and a bunch of incendiaries along with it. Normally, a payload of something like 12,000 pounds. Very heavy in comparison to what the Americans were carrying, for instance. But we had no armor and very little armament on our airplanes. Morale was remarkable. The crews, of course, were, generally speaking, very young, pretty stupid, didn't know any better. But we were very tightly knit. The squadron was, of course, one of two on a single base. There were 14 squadrons in the whole group. Tremendous deal of competition between the squadrons. And they ran very hard. We were fighting. We were fighting. We were proud of what we were doing. We were keen on what we were doing. We spent most of the time exhausted. but the daily routine, I suppose, had a good deal to do with the morale we didn't lack, because the average day was chock-block full. Our day began with a briefing. After our training in the morning, our briefing, if there was going to be an operation, we call them operations, not missions, was around about 2 o'clock, but it took almost 6.5 hours to get us airborne as a squadron. So that was a life that was a very vigorous one, tremendously assisted by the ground crew, who really looked after us and our beloved aircraft as you couldn't believe. It was a mission in their life, exactly the same as it was a mission in our life to get back home again. Because the casualties, as you know, were very high, about 50% casualties from in Bomber Command from one end of the war to the other. We didn't vary very much in that very high casualty rate. One never thought of being a casualty oneself, because it was really a fighting circumstance. You really were an observer. We never had an operation which wasn't an exciting one. There was never an operation which didn't involve a pretty hair-raising time. We were guaranteed a good time every time we went out, and I think this had something to do with the way our morale was kept up.
RCAF Bomber Command carried the war back to Germany. The Nighthawks, with their new Canadian-built Mosquito fighter bombers, also went on the offensive, crossing the Channel to strike at enemy airfields and rail supply lines in occupied France and deep into Germany. They left an impressive record of courage and achievement. 74 enemy aircraft were destroyed, and a further 24 damaged, 12 buzz bombs, and 7 military trains destroyed. 409 was distinguished as the top-scoring night fighter squadron after D-Day. First Allied squadron based in Normandy, first in Belgium, and first in Germany. 21 men were decorated.
We have learned today that war in Europe has been declared ended. The fighting was to end at 11:00.
When the war came to a close, Canadian demobilization was effected swiftly. Many RCAF squadrons operating in Europe were disbanded within days. Nighthawk Squadron was moved to the Netherlands, where on July 1st, 1945, it was officially disbanded. For many Allied servicemen, there was the gigantic task of helping to clean up the results of 5 years of war on European cities. But for most Canadians, the job was done. Holland was the last stop. It was time to go home. Canadian servicemen returning to Canada in 1945 found a country much different in many ways to the one that they had left 5 years before. The Canadian homeland, untouched by the destruction of war, had grown in those 5 years into a world industrial and military power. It was a time of great opportunity for Canadians. An English industrialist, Sir Roy Dobson, saw the opportunity in Canada, having been sent during the war to assist Victory aircraft with the setup and production of the Lancaster bomber. He was quick to act. In September of 1945, Sir Roy Dobson purchased the Crown Corporation Victory aircraft, and with a $2.5 million overdraft guarantee from Toronto industrialist J.P. Bickle, formed A.V. Rowe Canada Limited. Design work began immediately to reach into the newest field of technology, the jet aircraft. In 1948, the world's first passenger jetliner, a British designed and built aircraft known as the Comet, appeared. The aviation world was shocked to see only days later an all-Canadian designed and built passenger jetliner lift into the sky. Although there was worldwide acclaim for the Canadian jetliner, European affairs were to intervene. After the division of Germany, it became clear that Russian-occupied Europe was to stay just that. The Marshall Plan, a Western-sponsored plan for return to free elections and democratic governments, was denounced everywhere the Red Army remained. The borders were closed, and tensions grew. Soviet arming continued with dramatic expansion to all arms of the service. The confrontation attitude of the Soviet Union under Stalin was not to be a temporary position. With engineers captured from Germany, Soviet jet fighter aircraft and long-range bomber aircraft capable of reaching North America via the polar route were in production. It became clear the Soviet people had not been led to victory. They had been driven, obviously with further expansion in mind. In the West, Western post-war demobilization was being questioned as perhaps a bit hasty. The situation could no longer be ignored or considered a European problem. The Soviet Union had the bomb. The solution to the Second World War was to become a permanent threat to human survival. After just 5 years of peace, Canadians were again called to arms. In 1950, war broke out in Korea. As world tensions continued to grow, the state of Canadian air defense became a cause of great concern. The American jet fighter, the F-86 Sabre, was quickly put into production at Canadair in Montreal to provide fighter air cover for Canadian forces in Germany.
I suppose of the numerous aircraft that I've flown over almost 35 years of service, in the jet era, the Sabre was my favorite aircraft. The CF-100 is a great old all-weather machine, but for sheer joy of operation, I believe the Sabre had to take the cake.
But it was unsuitable for Canadian defense. A modern jet interceptor force was needed. Canadian geography, climate, and defense strategy determined the necessary capabilities of the interceptor. Such an aircraft did not exist anywhere in the world, nor was one in engineering or planning stages. The jetliner was pushed aside, and Avro went to work. The result was the Avro CF-100. It was the world's first all-weather interceptor, and it was all Canadian. Initial design work had begun at Avro in 1945 in reply to RCAF specifications. Design on a Canadian jet engine had been underway at Crown-owned Turbo Research Limited since 1944. At the war's end, Roy Dobson had purchased Turbo Research Limited and absorbed it into Avro as their gas turbine division. It was later known as Arenda Engines Limited. The combined companies employed almost 4,000 technicians. Although the CF-100 flew in January 1950, extensive testing was to follow before the CF-100 was to enter RCAF squadron service. The Avro-designed armament system consisted of a combination of 8 50-caliber machine guns and 29 high-explosive rockets located in each of the 2 wingtip pods. Although the rockets were ballistic, they were radar-sighted and fired. And in a lead collision attack, they produced a blistering stream of devastating fire. November the 1st, 1954, 409 Nighthawk Squadron was to officially reform at its new home, RCAF Station Comox. The CF-100 years were to be happy years. Spirit and morale were exceptionally high, and understandably so. With a speed of 640 knots, a ceiling of 45,000 feet, a range of over 2,000 miles, advanced radar fire control system, and air-to-air rockets, they were flying a state-of-the-art interceptor. And she was a homegrown bird. 9 squadrons stretched across the country, with 4 more squadrons deployed in Germany. With the radar net spanning the country all the way to the polar ice cap, and the coming agreement with the U.S. for the formation of NORAD, the Nighthawks were the westernmost link in the most advanced and complete air defense system in the world. The RCAF was at its zenith, and their uniform was worn with justifiable pride. To maintain air superiority and state-of-the-art equipment required foresight and advanced planning. It took 6 years from specification to deployment of a military aircraft. As the CF-100 was coming into squadron service, the RCAF issued a new specification for a highly advanced all-weather interceptor to continue Canadian air defense through the 60s. The advanced design team at Avro believed it could be designed and built in Canada, and a proposal was submitted for a supersonic all-weather interceptor. It was to become the Avro Arrow. The development, design, and production of the Arrow is a story filled with all the excitement and intrigue of the journey into the unknown that it was. The result was perhaps relatively the greatest research and development project in Canadian history. The performance characteristics called for had not only never been achieved, they exceeded the limits of contemporary theory. In order to prove out theories, a huge selection of test equipment was designed and built to provide the required accuracy for design testing. It was soon learned that the project needed components more advanced than could be supplied by existing industry in the U.S. or in Britain. Supply contracts were issued to Canadian companies who were willing to reach, through research and development of their own, the standards of uncompromised precision required by the Arrow. The result was the elevation to world-class standards of hundreds of Canadian industries: ball bearings, gear forming, metal formings, hydraulics, metal alloy and electronics industries, to name but a few. While contemporary aircraft were operating their control surfaces with systems of pulleys and cables, the Arrow was operated by an advanced system of electronic sensors, proportional actuators, relays, wires and hydraulic activators known as fly-by-wire. In the final stages, the programmable autopilot was capable of flight control so complete the aircraft could take off, fly, and land itself. Comparable flight control systems were not to appear in a production aircraft until 1971. Her engines more than twice as powerful as the ocean liner Queen Mary's. Just one of the Arrow's Iroquois engines was able to power this 6-engine bomber, and her armament bay was bigger than the bomber's. Over 11 miles of wiring, more electronic components than in 200 television sets. Only those who built her could see past the sharp, clean lines to the complexities within. On the morning of March 25th, 1958, the Arrow was to take to the air for her first flight. The test pilot was confident. Thousands of Avro employees were released from work to witness the first takeoff. The morning air filled with excitement and anticipation. No one was to be disappointed. The first flight of the Arrow was a flawless success.
This is it. Here it comes. That's it. It's off the ground. Oh, what a magnificent and thrilling sight. Like a great dart taking to the air at a 45-degree angle.
For a brief, shining moment in history, success was ours. The Arrow was a reality, and it was 20 years ahead of its time. On her third flight, in a 45-degree climb at less than full power, she broke the sound barrier. On her 44th flight, she reached Mach 2 in level flight without strain. It is conservative to assume the Arrow was capable of 2.5 times the speed of sound. 5 Arrows flew a total of 66 flights. All of the RCAF performance requirements had been met or exceeded. The factory was tooled, the assembly line in production. But the Arrow was not to be. On Friday, February 20th, 1959, with 5 Arrows flying and 6 completed and 5 on the assembly line, the project was canceled by government order. The existing aircraft were to be cut to pieces, the project destroyed without a trace. There would be no reprieve. The day of the decision is remembered by many Canadians as Black Friday. In Ottawa, a new air defense plan was taking shape. Douglas Harkness, then Minister of National Defense, envisioned the surface-to-air missile as the future weapon of air defense. The finest interceptor in the world was scrapped, while the government vigorously defended a new agreement reached with the Americans. Canada would take over the responsibility of all the northern radar stations. In return, the U.S. would provide 66 F-101 Voodoo interceptors at an attractive price. The Voodoos would be formed into 5 squadrons. In 1964, they would be reduced to 3. They replaced the 9 existing CF-100 squadrons. The Canadian industrial heartland would be defended by the new Boeing surface-to-air missile known as the Beaumark. Construction was begun on the Canadian Beaumark bases, but before they were complete, serious doubts about the Beaumark's effectiveness began to arise in the U.S. It was soon discovered that the missile was incapable of the accuracy its manufacturers, Boeing aircraft, had predicted. In fact, it was so inaccurate that in an effort to save the missile, Boeing discontinued the high explosive warhead and replaced it with a nuclear one. It was hoped that a nuclear blast, within the accuracy the missile was capable of, might damage an approaching bomber force. The project was dropped in the United States without the construction of one of the 36 American Beaumark bases originally planned. Construction on the Canadian Beaumark bases was completed. A total of 240 missiles were installed, but the Beaumark exploded the whole nuclear weapons issue in Canada. It was a very sensitive issue, with much public outcry and protest. And after a few years, the Beaumarks were quietly dismantled and returned to the U.S. without ever having made any significant contribution to Canadian air defense. With the disappointment of the Beaumont project, the responsibility for Canadian air defense was to be assumed by the 3 remaining Voodoo squadrons. 425 Squadron at Bagotville, Quebec, 416 Squadron at Chatham, New Brunswick, 409 Nighthawk Squadron at Comox, BC. These squadrons would shoulder this responsibility for over 20 years. The Western lack of desire for territorial expansion in the post-war period has led to a defense policy based on the strategy of aggression deterrence. The concept of deterrence requires the maintenance of an effective defense force held in a high state of readiness. Potential enemies must be convinced that their armed aggression would be met with a defensive force sufficient to deny them their objective and cause them unacceptable losses. The organization and personnel of Nighthawk Squadron today are dedicated to the relentless state of alert, efficiency, and readiness necessary for effective Canadian air defense. Armed and airborne within 3 minutes of the scramble horn, regardless of the time of day or weather conditions, they contribute the highest degree of defensive credibility that their equipment and numbers can provide. Responsible for the largest section in the NORAD network, the Nighthawk schedule of sovereignty patrols and training flights is a strenuous one. The readiness of the air crews must be matched by the readiness of their aircraft. The task of retaining the combat readiness of these aircraft over 20 years of active service is a formidable task indeed.
The 409 Squadron has been blessed with its own squadron maintenance since the 1970s. In fact, it has been the only squadron so blessed until very recently. Squadron maintenance is extremely important in that it allows the aviators, that is, the pilots and navigators, to become more closely related with the technicians that repair the aircraft. It is absolutely vital that the young technician on the floor who repairs our aircraft understands the squadron's goals, objectives, and aims. Without it, a very, very deep cleavage can develop between the technician who repairs and the aviator that flies.
The snag recovery and line maintenance sections of 409 Squadron consist of a collection of talented and professional technical experts, as fine as can be found in any air force in the world. The importance of their skills cannot be overstated.
If you want your car gassed up, fueled, you go to servicing. If you need the generator replaced, you'd have to go to snag recovery. So that gives you an idea of what the two organizations do. And working for me are approximately 120 men. Together, we ensure that we have 12 serviceable aircraft for this squadron to fly.
I have some of the best professional technicians working in the Air Force at any one time on the flight line. We are the last chance a pilot has to make sure that the aircraft is serviceable before he goes flying.
Their daily work is, quite literally, a matter of life and death. For the air crews, the days are full and the routine demanding. There are frequent evaluations and competitions with other NORAD squadrons. Scrambles are more frequent than one would expect. Effective combat readiness requires ongoing tactical training and intelligence briefing.
Formation. Remember that number 2, it's absolutely paramount that he stay well behind lead and also in a position to monitor everything that's happening on this flight of aircraft.
There is a bright spot in the Nighthawk calendar. In the late spring of each year, the Nighthawk formation team begins a tour of air shows throughout Western Canada and the U.S. Everyone looks forward to air show season. Inevitably, working routine and sober responsibility return. Patrol flights continue. The alert crews maintain their vigilance. The life of a Canadian fighter pilot in peacetime is not without danger. Despite the excellent safety record of the Voodoo, it's a difficult plane to fly. On occasion, the loss of an aircraft and the death of friends must sadly be faced. In times of increased world tensions, potential attack is only minutes away. The stressful weight of NORAD's frontline position must be carried.
You made your number 8,
Yeah.
GPS 11?
Go it down.
And how is...
CAC on. Roger. 409 copy. Kilo Charlie.
Unidentified aircraft eastbound bearing 010, measured 20,000, Mach 0.73, heading 150.
Telegraph 01, flight terminal clearance. Telegraph 01, flight is clear to the outer initial approach. Thanks by Gladstone Control to maintain flight level 350. Nighthawk departure runway 11. Turn left heading 330, squawk 0201.
01's clear to the outer by Gladstone, maintain 350, heading 330 with the Nighthawk departure 0201, the squawk.
01, flight readback is correct. Clear takeoff, surface winds 110 at 15.
01 flight. Tower to go 01, flight takeoff. Departure, Telegraph 01, flight's airborne.
Telegraph 01, flight radar down,
01 flight. Departure, Hotel Golf 01, flight 015,000.
Roger, Hotel Golf 01, flight standby. Hotel Golf 01, flight, contact Gladstone now, TCAP 15 backup, AICC.
Golf 01, flight, let's go tacticals. Gladstone, Hotel Golf 01, flight, check.
Hotel Golf 01, flight, Gladstone 69, squawk 4100, I-10. Hotel Golf 01, flight, check weapon safe.
Golf 01's weapon safe, 1 Bravo.
And Gladstone, Hotel Golf 02's weapon safe, 1 Bravo, holding hands port.
Roger, Hotel Golf 01 flight, you're paired. One target, bearing 010, 150. Measured 20,000, Mach 0.73, heading 150.
Golf 01, Roger.
Hotel Golf 01 flight, steer 020, Angel 35.
Golf 01 flight, go radar trail.
Hotel Golf 01 flight, target 01055. Combat Angels 18, set speed 0.83.
Golf 01, Roger, out of Angels 35 for 18 this time. Gladstone, Hotel Golf 01 flight, contact 03028.
Contact target 01 flight.
Golf 01, Judy.
Hotel Golf 01 flight, 10 miles.
01 flight, Judy.
Hotel Golf 01 flight, post-attack surveillance.
Golf 01 identifies 1 B-52.
Roger, Hotel Golf 01 cleared, post-attack 190, Angels 18.
A B-52 from America's Strategic Air Command sent to test the Nighthawk's readiness. Preparation and readiness are the keys. In today's shrinking world of modern technology, we are no longer isolated from international problems. Should our sovereignty be questioned, we would not have the luxury of years of preparation we have had in the past. Canadian freedom rests solely on the defense forces we have in place today.
Throw in flight, let's go button 5.
I think that the present-day services, and I've been quite close to them, have a really magnificent group of men and women serving. I don't think there have been ever any better in Canada. By the same token, I think their political support is shocking. It's a result of neglect as far as we're concerned. I believe we're only neck and neck with the lowest support group in the rest of NATO, which is Luxembourg, if you please. Our equipment is totally outdated in all three services. We're undermanned, and why our services are so excellent under those sort of handicaps, I really don't know.
On July 1st, 1984, the Voodoos of 409 Squadron were withdrawn from service. The men will move to Cold Lake, Alberta. Another base, a new aircraft, a new role. The Voodoos will be destroyed, except for a few that find their way to museums, like this one. Here they will take their rightful place amongst the aircraft that have become a part of Canadian history. Within our modern society of changing values and multiculturalism, one with the knowledge of history is humbled in these surroundings. It is here the value a man places on his country and its heritage is reflected in his determination to defend it.
There will always be a requirement for services in this country of ours if we are to maintain the freedoms that we've won at tremendous cost and should be equally determined to maintain. The fact that there is peace in our time is simply a godsend. None of those who serve in our services want it otherwise. But services there must be. Support for those services there must be. Proper equipment for those services there must be. And it is time that the politician understood this and got his story across to the public of this country.
I think the role we play here is a very important one. We're the only Canadian Air Defense Squadron in Western Canada. And that means that it's Canadians providing the sovereignty on this part of the country, not Americans or anyone else. We provide the controlling agency, we also provide the fighters. And I think that's a very important thing to remember when you talk about air defense in Canada. I think the future for Canadian air defense is very bright with the F-18. Being a fighter pilot, I'm looking forward to flying that aircraft in the future.
If we had wings, just you and I, we'd make friends with an eagle and learn how to fly. We'd master the wind, the sky would be ours, and so high above the steel and glass towers. If we had wings, just you and I. Out of the blue, dream has come true, daring to try, we've flown so high. Come soar with us, touch the sky. Out of the blue, dream has come true, by daring to try, we've flown so high. Come soar with us, touch the sky.